Welcome to the Changing the Perception of Sales podcast. And today, I have the privilege of being joined by our very own Steve Lowndes. Steve, great to have you on the couch.
Great to be here. It's been a while coming, I think, actually. But yeah, glad to eventually make it all the way from my desk to here. It's a good 15 yards, so great workout.
Good, absolutely. We got you here on time as well.
Yeah.
I know you very well, Steve, very well, but there might be people listening to this that maybe don't know you as well as I do. So for those that don't know who you are, please tell them a little bit about yourself.
I'm the head of sales training here at Prime, and been in sales for, God, I really am going to show my age, 31 years.
Wow.
So 31 years ago, I started my sales career, and been involved in numerous different places. I won't kind of bore you with all the details, but yeah, probably for the last 15 years, I've been working with various different businesses in a sort of sales consulting training role. So going into organizations, working with their sales team, looking to try and get them from whatever level they're at to wherever level they need to be. So that's kind of been my role for the last 15 years. And yeah, part of that, I've learned quite a lot along the way. I've seen, I've worked with some great salespeople. I've seen what great salespeople do. I've tried to codify what great salespeople do and what really works in the B2B sales arena. And yeah, authored a book with my good friend Bryn Thompson, Transformational Selling. So that came out a couple of years ago, and still continue to learn and develop the ideas that I have around that, and still learning from all the salespeople that I'm working with in terms of what really works, what's really required out there, and how best to take the sales to the next level.
Steve, how many salespeople do you think you've trained in your 31 years in the industry?
Yeah, I've tried to do this mental calculation before. I've no idea. Obviously it's in the thousands. I think it's got to be in the tens of thousands, realistically, when I look back over that 15 years in terms of that. And actually that's been tens of thousands of people. A lot of them were very early on in the sales career. So I've dealt with a lot of people literally only a few weeks or months into their sales career. But actually a huge amount right at the other end, where people who've been in sales for 10, 15, 20, 25 years, even more.
And tens of thousands then. I'm kind of picturing a football stadium with all of the salespeople that you've trained over the years in attendance. And that's why we thought you'd be a really good person to have on to discuss this particular topic today, because in line with the podcast now, talking about more digestible topics, we wanted to focus on some of the challenges that SDRs, I say SDRs, any entry-level salesperson, SDR isn't the only entry-level sales role, but some of the challenges, or maybe the 3 challenges they typically face in their first 3 months, because you've probably worked with so many salespeople that have faced these challenges, and we want to talk about why the challenges exist, but actually what we can do to overcome and maybe deal with them. So this kind of episode today is aimed at people that are early on in their sales careers, but also sales managers and leaders that have maybe got SDRs or salespeople in their team facing these challenges, so they can be equipped with how best to deal with them, really. So I guess over to you, really, Steve, before we go through the 3 challenges that we've kind of come up with today. What do you think are some of the issues that salespeople face when they're very early on in the role?
Yeah, it's a great point. And actually, I think what I'm about to go through here, yes, I think highly relevant to new salespeople, but I think it's actually going to be really relevant for existing salespeople as well. And I would say that everything I'm about to talk about, I have seen as being a challenge for people 5, 10, even 15 years into their sales career who still have some of these challenges and still have some of these issues. So yeah, we'll look at it through a lens of a new seller, but actually I think it's broader than that.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, let's get into it then. So I know we've got the 3. I think mindset was something you were keen to touch on as part of this. It's a word we hear a lot, isn't it, in sales? So where do maybe salespeople go wrong with this before we get into the 3?
So look, mindset is absolutely fundamental to the whole sales process. Well, it's fundamental to everything. I think anything that has an element of performance in it. So whether it be kind of sports, business, sales, whatever it might be, Anything where performance is required, mindset is going to be absolutely key. One of the biggest challenges that I see for salespeople, and it particularly afflicts new entrants into sales, but I see it with people with a lot more experience as well, is the idea that when they are entering into any kind of sales conversation, there's a degree, and I see this a lot, of subservience. And what I mean by that is we go into a sales conversation with somebody who is perhaps a senior decision maker within an organization. Maybe they've got a big scary title and they're C-suite or whatever. And what happens is salespeople go into those conversations and there's a mismatch, there's inequity in the relationship from the outset. And the important thing you've got to remember as a salesperson is you're a human being talking to another human being who is no more or less important than you. Yes, they might have huge amounts of power and status and whatever else, but this is two human beings having a conversation. And what happens too often with salespeople is they enter as a subservient. They put their client on a pedestal. And as a result of that, it makes it really difficult for them to have difficult conversations. They're too busy wanting to be liked or respected or whatever it be, as opposed to actually standing up and having an adult-to-adult conversation. So I see that a lot where obviously new entrants, because they feel very inferior to the prospects they're speaking to, but actually that can afflict a salesperson throughout their career.
Interesting. And I think what I like about that is you mentioned typically when we talk about mindset, it's very much linked to motivation and drive, but actually what you've talked about there is more mindset from a status perspective, more than anything else. I think it's really interesting. And let's get into the three things then. So what do you say is the number one, I mean in no particular order, but the number one or the first challenge that salespeople face?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about discipline. And we all know that, again, to be an elite performer in any walk of life, whatever you do, it requires discipline. It requires doing actions and putting effort in, and it's about quality and quantity of activity. And that's important, actually, quality and quantity of activity in the right balance, repeated consistently, and that's what's going to drive great performance. So one of the problems that we often see, so let's take a new entrant into sales, and very quickly they get left to their own devices. So if we take a classic SDR role, so there's elements to the role. They've got to sort of prospect and find leads and sort of generate leads and do their research. Then they've got to, perhaps if they're taking a multi-channel approach, so they've got to be calling those prospects, but they might also be emailing, they might be using LinkedIn, they might be using other channels as well as a means of outreach. The problem they have with the discipline part is too often they turn up in the morning and go, right, what am I going to do today? I'll do some calls. So they do calls for an hour or two, and then they go, right, I'll do some emails, or I'll do this. And instead of being a structured set of activity that's well thought through, it just seems a bit random and haphazard. So they don't necessarily then work the leads through. They don't necessarily follow a sequencing. They don't necessarily know when they're doing the calling or when they're doing these bits and pieces. And everything just sort of happens, if you like, as opposed to you and I know, actually, if they're structured, and it's not about coming in the morning and going, I know what I'm going to do today. It's about start of the week going, I know what I'm going to do this week. I know when my calling slots are. I know when I'm going to be dealing with this. I know when I'm going to be dealing with that. And actually, if something comes along in the way, one day something comes in that they have to deal with, they go, right, okay, I can reschedule that. I was due to do this then. I'll now do it at this particular time, as opposed to not doing it at all. But we know outreach is kind of really challenging. And I think there was the stat that said pre-pandemic, probably on average 6 to 8 touch points you needed to get a sign of life from your client, to get a response or to pick up the phone or whatever it might be. Post-pandemic, and I think the last research I saw coming from Gong, it was about 12 to 15 touch points. Well, how are you going to manage each of your prospects through 12 to 15 touch points if you haven't got yourself well organized, if you're not well structured, and you haven't got your discipline around, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that, then I'm going to do the other. And the one thing I've seen is that those SDRs, one of the characteristics I've seen from new entrants that do make success and are successful relatively quickly, is they are very structured and disciplined about how they spend their day or their week. So that's the advice to SDRs. If you're managing SDRs and you've got new people coming in, you've got to help them. You've got to help them create those structures, and you've got to hold them accountable to making sure that they're spending their time and they're putting their activity in the right places and they're being well organized. And that's the help that they need early on, because very often they come into SDR roles, and we know we place a lot of graduates, okay? And this isn't a criticism of the educational system, but they're not particularly disciplined. They're not necessarily structured. When you're used to having a timetable that has 4 lectures a week, and then you do the rest of your work around, you just kind of plod your way through. And that doesn't mean that they don't work hard, but they've never had that structure or that discipline. And then suddenly you're putting them into a world where it needs it. And we forget sometimes that they need that help. And actually, there's quite a few experienced salespeople who might also benefit from a little bit more structure around how they're managing that. But that's definitely the number one thing I'd be looking for.
Brilliant, love it. I think discipline, it gets talked about a lot, doesn't it? Discipline trumps motivation at times. It's doing the things when maybe you don't feel like doing it. But I think what you've talked about there really is knowing, or a salesperson should know what they are doing that week. They should probably know why they're doing it as well and have the intent behind it. So if you're a salesperson listening to this and going, what Steve's just said has resonated with me massively, your advice would be to make sure you've got your structure within that week and things scheduled out, but you know why they're scheduled out and there's an element of importance to it. If you're a manager, make sure you give some guidance, some structure that they can follow.
I just want to talk about that motivation and discipline, because I agree, but I'm going to put a slightly different perspective on it. And I've heard people talk about motivation and discipline, right? They are the same thing. They're just dressed up differently. And a lot of it is how you define what motivation is. And a lot of times we think motivation is that rah, yeah, I'm ready to go, I'm there, the stamping, the banging your head against the wall, I'm doing it. That's not what motivation, that's one. But for me, motivation is, I've got a goal that I want to achieve. I've got an outcome that I'm working towards. And sometimes I'm up for doing the work and sometimes I'm not. But even the days when I'm not and I don't feel like it, I've got an outcome, and that's what makes me do it. So I actually think motivation and discipline are kind of the same thing, because motivation is, I've got something that I really want to achieve, and discipline is, and the times when I don't want to put the effort in, I still put the effort in because I'm focused on what I want to achieve. And I think that is really key. So back to, again, new starters and an aside for every salesperson, what is it that you want to achieve? What are you working towards? Because that's the thing that gets you out of bed doing the hard yards in the morning when you really don't want to.
Yeah, brilliant. Love it. And I think that's the key. The most successful salespeople are probably still doing it, even when they don't feel like doing it. And like you said, it's because that goal or whatever they want to achieve is so strong.
Correct. And actually, the strength of the goal gives you the strength of the discipline. It's all intertied. But I kind of agree.
Right, number one then. So discipline is where a lot of salespeople fall down. What's the second challenge that you've seen?
I'm going to get boring now. Sales maths.
You love sales maths.
I love a bit of sales maths. And maybe that's because I'm a bit of a geek at heart, and that's part of it. But a lot of salespeople don't like doing the maths. And what I mean by the maths is, this is about tracking your metrics and tracking your numbers. And sales is measured in terms of numbers. I don't know any salesperson that isn't measured in terms of numbers, all right? So whether that be margin or GP or revenue, etc., or meetings booked, etc., everything's measured by numbers. And actually everything you do contributes towards that end number, or should do. So here's the key. So let's take somebody who's in an SDR role and coming in. So if you think about it from that perspective, my target might be meetings booked, or meetings attended, actually, not just meetings booked. That's not necessarily the same thing, as we know. So meetings attended, let's say that's my target. But actually what I need to be able to do is I need to be able to work backwards from that and go, well, actually, in order to get X number of meetings attended, how many meetings booked do I need to do? Knowing that there will be a dropout, but actually what's an acceptable level of dropout? Meetings attended, okay, so I have to go back to, all right, so how many conversations do I need to have in order to get so many meetings booked, to get so many meetings attended? Then I can work backwards from that. So, okay, so how many decision makers do I need to speak to? So therefore, how many dials do I need to make, and how much? And this is the important part, is around working out what kind of level of activity do I need to put through my funnel that brings me out at the other side. And the reason why I need to know this is not just so that I can map out how much activity I need to put in, but the most important bit is being able to measure the conversion from one step to the next. So classic example might be, and if we're not tracking metrics, it's easy to get blown off course. So you might be an SDR, you might be making some cold calls, you might be having some good success with what you're doing, you've got a nice intro that's set up, whether you're using permission-based openers or not, or or whatever your opening elevated pitch is, or whatever your opening statement is, etc. You've got a structure and you've got a script or a framework that you're following when you open up a call. And then that's all going well, and then one day someone goes, I hate your opener, and puts the phone down on you. And then maybe later that day somebody else makes the same comment or goes, oh no, not interested, bang. And then suddenly you start to doubt yourself, because you're so fixated on, oh, I've had this particular issue, or I've had this particular challenge. And so you end up going back and go, oh, I need to rewrite my opener because this person told me they hated it. But actually, if you go back and measure it, you go, but it seems to work, because 90% of the time when people pick up, it's getting you to the next stage, it's getting you to conversation. So the important part here about tracking your metrics is it's important to know what's working and what isn't. Why didn't we make as many sales? What's the bit that's missing? What's changed? Which element of that? And if people are tracking their numbers and they're tracking the conversion from one step to the next, it becomes fairly obvious to look, and you can see what's working, what isn't, what should you be looking at in more detail, and actually what should you be leaving alone, because do you know what? Yes, that guy on the end of the phone was having a bad day and rubbished your opener, but most people seem to quite like it, or it seems to be relatively effective, because 90% of the time that is getting a conversation. So leave it alone.
Love it, definitely. I think people are so quick to see something new on LinkedIn and go, oh, I need to change it, I need to try that, when actually sometimes it's okay to leave it, like you said. What would you say are the metrics then that we need to be tracking that are important?
So look, for most SDR roles, if we look around, so let's assume based around cold calling, for example, I would be looking, so the typical metrics I would recommend are things like this. I'd go, right, let's have a look at number of dials and number of connects. So dials to connects, again, there is a few things you can do around that to influence that, but it just kind of tells you and gives you a base level and says, this sets my expectations that if I ring 100 people, let's be honest, connect rate might be 15%. All right, but at least I know I'm going to ring 100 people, I'm probably going to get about 15 times the person I want to speak to will pick up the phone. The next one I would look at is then connect to conversation. So this is a slightly more subjective one, but this is where the person I wanted to speak to has picked up the phone. How many times do we get beyond the opening piece and beyond the I'm busy or it's not relevant or whatever, and into an actual conversation? So I think that's a really important metric, because that tells me how well is my opener getting beyond the initial reaction, which is likely to be, for most people when you cold call, their initial reaction is a little bit defensive, a little bit want to get you off the phone. How well is my opener by kind of bringing down those barriers and encouraging people to then engage with the rest of the call? So I'd be looking at that as a really important metric. The next one is how many times does that conversation then turn into a meeting booked? So how well am I using that conversation to help explore maybe one or two pain points that the customer might be having or the prospect might be feeling that would make them want to kind of commit to a next step? And then actually a really important one is how many times from booking a meeting does that meeting actually get attended? It tells you about the quality of the opportunity you're opening up, and it tells you how well the customer recognises the importance of the meeting and what you're going to bring to that. So for me, those would be the basic metrics. There's other ones you could look at as well. If you're calling landlines and you're getting a lot of gatekeepers, I'd also be keeping a note of how often do I get to a gatekeeper, how often do I get through.
Yeah.
And again, if my ratio's low, but somebody else 2 desks along from me is getting a much higher ratio of gatekeepers, what are they doing? What can I learn from that?
Brilliant. So I think it's dials, connects, conversations, booked to attended. And it's less so, I mean, look, the numbers are really important. There has to be, a minimum expectation of activity for the ratios to matter. But it's more, as you said, those conversions and ratios that you can then review and know, right, okay, this isn't working, that this is what we need to fix, coach, train on.
Absolutely.
Whose responsibility is it to track sales metrics?
Very, very good question. All right. Well, you're a sales leader.
Yes.
So I'm going to do the classic trainer thing and flip it on you.
To me.
Who do you think should own that?
I would encourage the salesperson to own that and have full accountability. I'd also expect the manager to know. But I think if I was a salesperson listening to this going, oh my God, I don't know my sales maths, I've not had any support or guidance from the manager, I'd go, yeah, you probably should have some support and guidance, but it's your responsibility. You need to take accountability over your own performance.
That's a great answer. And I always come back to this and I go, if I look at some of the really successful salespeople that I've worked with, out of the tens of thousands that I've worked with, and some of them I've trained and some of them I've just had the pleasure of working with and observing. Here's one thing I'll tell you, the very, very best salespeople, and this isn't just about SDRs, this is beyond whatever, they know their numbers. They own those numbers because they're their numbers. And you're absolutely right, as a sales leader, I should also have visibility too. But it's a much better conversation when I'm sat down with an SDR and going, right, struggled a bit last month, where do you think that is? And they go, actually, my conversation to meeting booked ratio was a bit lower last month. Okay, why do you think that might be? I don't know, am I asking the right? All right, let's go and explore that then. So when they own it, the coaching conversation is so much more effective than when I'm coming to them and going, hey, this is why I think your numbers are down. Well, I shouldn't have to do that. They can be in control of that. And, one of the best things I've seen, and actually our guys do it here at Prime, I love the fact you walk past the desk and they've got a notepad out and they're just doing bar and gate. And every time they do a dial, they do bar. Every time they have a conversation, and fine, I know we've got a system that can measure all that, but it's great because that's them really connected to those numbers and they really own those numbers. And actually we get them to present the numbers back, and I've seen you do this, and you go, well, I know I've got them here on the system, but I let the guys do it. And they own it, and they come to us and go, this is what's working well for me, this is what I think isn't working well, can you help me?
Yeah. Brilliant. So we've got discipline.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of people fall down. We've got not knowing their numbers. Because if you don't know your numbers, how do you know what is going well and what isn't going well for you? It's very difficult to do so. What's the third one?
So the third one is, and again, it's all interconnected, it's about focusing on the right things. And I'll explain this. So this is very specific for SDRs right now. But when an SDR picks up the phone and I go, what are you trying to achieve? When you pick up the phone, what are you trying to achieve? And the problem is whilst the ideal outcome is I want to book a meeting.
That's probably the most common response as well.
It is, yeah. You go, I want to book a meeting. And you kind of go, yeah, that's what you want to achieve. But actually, that desire to book a meeting sometimes gets in the way of you booking a meeting. And the biggest focus should be, let's just focus on what's in front of me right now, which is having a conversation. Right? Now, I'm going to put a little bit of caveat around this, because a lot of this is about the kind of sales process that you follow. And there are certain businesses out there that are in the B2B world, but still are quite transactional. So you've got a fairly straightforward product that meets a very specific need, and you're ringing around people who know they might need it, and you're literally going, do you have this problem? Because I think we can fix it. Shall we meet? And you go, great. But for the most businesses, actually what's required is a much more consultative approach to sales. Dare I say, transformation approach. And in that case, actually, our cold calls and our outreach need to be a little less transactional as well. So whilst I might be ringing up with the hope that maybe this will lead to a meeting, because that's what, and if that gets attended, that's a mark against my name, and I may well get commission or bonused on the number of meetings attended, etc. But my first instinct is, let's forget about booking a meeting right now. Number one thing is, I just want to have a conversation. Because if I have a conversation with a prospect and I'm able to ask some questions and understand more about their business, first of all, I can work out, is it even worth us having a meeting? The second thing is I can help the prospect answer that question. Is it worth us having a meeting? Because the more I get them to think and reflect on the situation, the more I learn about it, actually the more likely they are to go, yeah, sounds like actually this might be a conversation worth having. So both parties need to have that conversation to work out whether it's relevant for them moving forward. But the problem is because I'm so fixated on the outcome, which is to book a meeting, I try and bypass that conversation piece, which is the mechanism by how the meeting happens. So the call goes something like this. I open up and we do the opening piece, and maybe I give a little bit of an elevator pitch that's very problem focused. So I might go, I speak to a lot of others like this, or we do a lot of others. Look, here's the typical problems I'm hearing from sales directors right now. It's these kind of things around that. And then I hear the SDR go straight into, and look, if any of this resonates with you, maybe we should have a meeting. Or they go, and I'm calling to try and book a meeting, or right. And they start pitching for the meeting almost within that first 30 to 60 seconds of the call. They're signaling, I'd like to have a meeting with you. I'd love to book a meeting to get a conversation. Now, the challenge you've got is, look, the relationship that I've had with you, prospect to seller, is less than 60 seconds old. And already you want something from me. So my natural reaction is probably to push back on that and go, I'm not so sure. And then what I'm doing is I'm spending the rest of the call trying to take down the barrier that I've created by asking for something too early. So rather than going in, if I go in with a mindset that says, I just want to have a conversation with you, Carl. So I'm going to throw it out there and let's just have a conversation, which will involve me asking some questions. You might even ask me a couple of questions. We might get a bit of dialogue going. Once I've got that dialogue, and actually maybe you've started to see there might be some value in continuing this conversation, and I can see that there might be value, then I'll pitch for the meeting. Then I'll put it in. But let's do it at a time when you will see value in that, in continuing the conversation, and I will see value, because if I pitch too early, the defense goes up. And the analogy I often use, I use a football analogy. And I see it here and I go, just because I've got the ball and I can see the goal, it doesn't mean I shoot. Because I'm 80 yards out. And the chances of scoring is like, work your way up the pitch, then shoot for the meeting, if you like, at a point when actually you've got a much better chance of it succeeding because you're a lot closer and you've worked your way into that position. But you've got to earn the right to pitch for a meeting. You've got to earn the right to do that, and you earn the right by asking questions and by actually helping somebody see for themselves why there might be value.
Brilliant. Love it. I think that helps with what you said at the beginning as well, almost about that equity piece, because when you're so less or not as focused on the meeting as such, it kind of helps that equity. I don't even know if we can help you yet, and we talk a lot about almost pushing the prospects away is like a really powerful thing to be able to do. And I think in the first few months, salespeople probably lack the ability or maybe confidence to be able to do that. But I think it's really, really important. To kind of summarize then, so where the majority of salespeople are going wrong, they are lacking discipline and structure. So they're coming in and saying things like, I'm just going to make a few calls and do a few emails. We need to get into a position where there is structure, intent. They know what they are doing, not just for the day, but for the weeks ahead, and know why they're doing it. The second area in where most people are falling down is they just don't know their numbers. So they're doing things every day, but don't know the conversions and ratios. So we need to be able to track the key metrics that we talked about, so we know what's working and maybe what we need to work on and what we need to improve. And the third thing is, too many people are so focused on the actual meeting itself, whereas what we could benefit from doing is focusing more on just the conversation. And I really love the football analogy that you mentioned as well. So there's some 3 really compelling challenges there, and hopefully some good tips that people, salespeople and leaders alike, can take from this to implement into their day-to-day. Look, it's our podcast here, so we can plug it, and we can plug what we do, so we're going to do it. Not sorry. So we've come up with the Prime Sales Academy that's intended to help with some of these challenges and enable SDRs and junior salespeople to ramp up quickly, perform better in the role, and ultimately stay for longer. So we won't plug too much, Steve, but if people are still here and listening in, do you want to share a little bit about the Prime Sales Academy?
Yeah, well, I think you've just kind of given it the great headlines, really, because that's exactly what it is. So, it's about equipping people both with the mindset and the structure about how should I be structuring my time, what should I be measuring, and then actually the skills for them to be able to have a really decent conversation. How do we kind of get them thinking a little bit differently about where their needs might be, and how do we build value if it's right to do so in a next step? So yeah, the idea is that we take people who are often relatively new and go, what are the things that they need to be in a position after 12 weeks to be a really effective target hitting SDR, and that was the idea behind the program.
Brilliant. So if you're interested in finding out more about the Prime Sales Academy, get in touch with Steve or one of the team at Prime. But Steve, thanks for joining us. Long overdue, but really enjoyed it. Massive thanks again.
Pleasure.